Hello everyone, I'm Brior and welcome back to Goodgame Empire. I have finally decided to make a video about the server war, which is something some of you have wanted me to do for a long time. This isn't a video I've been ready to make until now, since, as most of you know, I used to be involved in the server war myself. I didn't want to bring any drama to the channel, or make a video I would later regret making, and I especially wanted to avoid upsetting players on either side. I think it's safe to make this video now, though. Why? Well, it's been almost a year since I had any involvement in the war, and believe me when I say this, I no longer care about what the outcome of the war will be. I also feel like the term server war is now a bit of a misnomer. When the war began, almost all of the large alliances on the server got involved. These alliances either dropped out or were reduced in membership over time, and now the fighting is just between a few hundred players at best. But that doesn't mean that the server war hasn't been the biggest and most prolonged conflict in the history of Goodgame Empire, and something like that is worth talking about. So let's discuss 3 things regarding the server war: its history, its impact, and how it has highlighted some of the mechanical weaknesses of the game. The war began in earnest on Halloween 2014 between 2 of USA 1's most prominent alliances, Kingdom of Nef and the Misk. It might surprise you to know that, before the war, these 2 alliances were good friends. They had even fought and destroyed the server's previously most prominent alliance, Hive, together. The exact and truthful cause for the server war is difficult to determine, since each alliance presented separate and totally different accounts of the events which led up to it. According to an 11-page document released by the Misk, there were at the time hundreds of alliances who had begun to carry resentment toward the Kingdom of Nef. Thanks to all the wars they had fought and won, the Kingdom of Nef had grown the reputation of acting as the server police. I believe this is a reputation the members and leaders of the kingdom actually appreciated, since it was a form of recognition of their power. However, this reputation was not appreciated by other players. According to the document, the members of the Misk intended to fight on the side of their longtime allies if a war was to break out. And yet, the trust between the 2 alliances was eroding, since each had become too powerful. At this time, capitals, royal towers, and metropolises were being introduced to the game, so the large alliances on each server became more paranoid about holding and maintaining property. There was one particular player who found himself in a position to take advantage of this, and he went by the name of Geoloop. At this time, Geoloop was a deputy of the Misk, but his real ambition was to become a permanent member of the Kingdom of Nef. Geoloop also wanted to start a war between 2 other alliances on the server, and to get revenge upon members in the Misk whom he had felt offended him. Geoloop shared screenshots with the Kingdom of Nef from private Misk chat rooms, which he had had access to as a deputy, taking special care to make it look like the Misk was planning to attack the kingdom. Taking this information at face value, the leaders of the kingdom accepted Geoloop as a member and declared war on the Misk. In the ensuing days, the war spread to include many of the alliances who wished to see the demise of the kingdom come to pass. According to the document, Kingdom of Nef turned to another powerful alliance on the server, Dream Team, and requested for them to join the war in their favor. Dream Team, as the 3rd powerhouse of the server, was expected to join the war, but previously had been friends with both sides. The Misk was able to show Dream Team screenshots of the leaders of the Kingdom of Nef planning to mass Dream Team days earlier, before the outset of the server war. This likely played a role in convincing Dream Team to join the server war on the side of the Misk, which they did. You might be thinking that the Kingdom of Nef was now quite outnumbered, but that was not actually the case. At this point in time, the Kingdom of Nef was a large family of alliances that included upwards of 1,000 players all by itself. As I said near the beginning of this video, I was involved in the server war. I started out as one of those 1,000+ members in an alliance called Neflux Mundi, which was a sub-alliance of Kingdom of Nef 2, which is still a sub-alliance of the Kingdom of Nef. You might ask me 2 things. First, how I came to be a member of Nef, and second, why I decided to stick it out and keep fighting for their side. Let me try and answer both of those questions by talking about my own history in the game, and how that history intersects with that of the server war. At around the time Geoloop stole one of my resource villages, I was one of the leaders in a small alliance called Dark Army. I've talked a lot about my experiences in Dark Army in previous videos, including the most recent audio-only episode before this. Dark Army was a fantastic alliance to be in, but the departure of several key members meant the alliance became unsustainable. Some of my friends in that alliance had connections to the players who ran Netflix Mundi and went there after Dark Army's collapse. I didn't want to join Nef and tried to stick it out on my own, but had more of my resource villages stolen and eventually decided that was enough. As I've mentioned several times, the Kingdom of Nef was a really powerful network of alliances in the game at that time, and it had also tried to impose rules upon the rest of the server. One such rule was that against stealing resource villages. Out of fear of retribution, no player, big or small, would have considered stealing a resource village from a member of the kingdom at that time. Joining the kingdom was, then, to be a logical choice. I could keep playing with most of my friends from Dark Army, and I wouldn't have to worry about my resource villages being stolen. I was further encouraged to join the Kingdom of Nef by a friend named Zombie Master, who had previously played in Dark Army. I had actually recruited him to join that alliance. You might recognize the name Zombie Master, since he became one of the war marshals in the kingdom's main alliance. Things went well for me, until the war broke out. When the war did break out, it hit us hard. I said before that the kingdom had over 1,000 members, but one of the lessons its leaders learned quickly is that having many weak players on your side doesn't help you in a war. The members of the main alliance were big-time ruby buyers and could definitely hold their own. Indeed, some of them still are. But the members of the sub-alliances, and especially the sub-alliances of the sub-alliances, were weak and untrained. Netflix Mundi posed no threat to the MISC and its allies, and yet we somehow lasted longer than most of the other Nef subs. There were small alliances fighting on the side of the MISC too, and that was a good thing for us because it gave us a way to participate in the war. We couldn't successfully attack our powerful enemies, but we could get pot shots in against their subs. After a few months of fighting, however, the enemy sub-alliances were destroyed, and the kingdom sub-alliances were reduced in number. With no way to help out, the kingdom's sub-alliances stagnated and were destroyed over time by the bigger players who remained on the side of the enemy. Netflix Mundi eventually disbanded in the same way that Dark Army had, and I was left with the choice. Either join another Nef alliance or set out on a different path. I chose the former, which was to remain in the server war, and I'm not sure if that was the right choice, but let's talk about why I made it. Earlier in this video, I presented to you the start of the server war from the perspective of a member of the MISC, and that's because I've always thought they had the stronger argument. They also did a better job of publicizing their argument, and I think that's why they accumulated more allies after the war began. Yet I was quite frankly disgusted by the actions of some of the players on the side of the MISC, and that's because they had taken it upon themselves to release real-life photographs and other information of Empire players on the game's forums. To me, that is point-blank unacceptable. I've since come to realize that the members of the kingdom were doing similarly offensive things, but the fact was that the MISC had and still continues to have a bigger presence on the forums. I think that's in part because of how the MISC was founded. The MISC was comprised mostly of members of the weightlifting forums at bodybuilding.com. The original leader of the MISC was a member of those forums and used them to recruit new members. That's why so many of them have names like Curl Bra and Do You Even Lift Bra. I'm not saying that physically fit individuals are more likely to be jerks online, but I am saying that the members who had been recruited from the bodybuilding forums clearly already had forum experience. Anyways, as I said, there were members of the kingdom who were no better. Zombie Master, whom I previously mentioned as being one of the reasons I joined the Kingdom of Nef, took up the hobby of posting pro-Nef battle reports on the forums. This incited war on the forums, since the MISC players simply responded with battle reports of their own. The influx of Nef and MISC members to the forums turned them into an explicit, aggressive, and unfriendly place. I was pretty much an unknown player at this point, but then I started to make videos about the game. When I released a video about attacking the Kraken during the Blade Coast, members of the MISC got together to flag it for abuse. The video was taken down and my channel received a community guidelines strike. Any channel that receives 3 such strikes gets permanently deleted by YouTube. I resolved the matter and the video is now back up to watch. In fact, I'll leave a link to it in this video's description, but that was very uncool. As the war passed its first anniversary, more and more alliances were either merging or dropping out of the war entirely. Dream Team dropped out on the side of the MISC, and Grumpy King and the Unforgiven dropped out on the side of the Kingdom of Nef. These alliances had had their fun in the war and were now able to drop out because they didn't have the same level of emotional engagement as the leaders of the kingdom and the Misk. The war was beginning to get really dirty. Players no longer had any respect for the opposing side. I had moved up to join Kingdom of Nef 2 at this point, and let me give you an idea of the tactics players on both sides were using. When a player needs to take a break from the game, they can purchase Protection Mode to avoid being attacked. Protection Mode does not, however, prevent one's resource villages from being stolen. Players on both sides constantly scanned the opposition's roster for players who had chosen to go under Protection Mode. These players then stole the resource villages from those players, either keeping them or abandoning them. Abandoning them made it harder for the victim to get their resource villages back, since abandoned resource villages could be picked up by any player on the server. Many players had to leave Protection Mode long before it was over, which was a waste of thousands of their rubies. It used to be that players could keep a large but unspecified number of messages in their inbox, but when the developer imposed a new limit, players in the server war came up with a new technique. They could steal a resource village and drop it, and then log into another account and purposefully fail a bunch of espionage attempts at one of their target's castles. The target would receive a bunch of caught spy messages. Receiving 25 of them would push the resource village battle report out of the target's inbox. If the target then logged in and read his messages, he might not know he had lost resource villages, and if he did, he wouldn't be able to find them on the map. Players on both sides also proved willing to steal resource villages from players who weren't even participating in the war if those resource villages were of use. Resource villages could be of use if they were close to an enemy's castle in ice, sands, or fire, because attacks from them could be used to snipe out the enemy's attackers. In reality, that wasn't a very smart strategy, because it would then give the target a resource village right next to his or her castle, which he or she could store troops in. Players in the server war started to build fireproof castellans and fire-starting commanders. Castellans to make themselves fireproof, and commanders to destroy the buildings of their opponent's castles. The players on the side of the Misk proved to be better at this, and were able to perfect the strategy of minimizing the consequence for being defeated by an attack. Players who had fireproof castles would purposely bait enemy players into attacking them before equipping those castellans and setting their defenses to waste the attack tools of the enemy player. Players stayed awake until the early hours of the morning, so that, when an event concluded and enemy players got rewarded with troops, those troops could be killed off with a 5 a.m. attack. Players tried to guess the passwords of other players so that they could log in and drop the outposts of the victim. If the victim was a ranking member of the Alliance, the victim's account could be used to kick other members. This meant that the troops of those members who were removed from the Alliance, usually in the early hours of the morning, would come home from the Alliance safe house and could then be attacked and killed. Once the developer introduced the tribute system to the game, which was an awful update by the way, leadership accounts with weak passwords were used to repeatedly declare war upon and make peace with other alliances. Each time, a large percentage of the Alliance's stored resources were given to the other Alliance as a tribute. This would be repeated until the Alliance storehouse of the first Alliance was completely empty. There were 2 Kingdom of Nef alliances that were destroyed by the password-guessing efforts of the Misk, Free Kingdoms and Wrath of Khan. Some player guessed the password to the account of one of the leaders of Khan and dropped his outposts. The fact that all of this happened did and still does make me legitimately angry. When it comes to things like password guessing, the primary perpetrators seem to have been the Misk. Nef players definitely used shady tactics and were equally as aggressive, but I viewed the password guessing as being over the line. It could be that Nef players tried this too, but that the Misk players used stronger passwords. I'm sure the members of the Misk would tell you that the kingdom deserved this because the members of the kingdom shared their passwords with one another. Sometimes passwords were leaked in messages, and sometimes who had access to a particular account was unclear. Not to mention that's against the rules to share passwords. However, I think the members of the Misk are just as guilty of password sharing. For your information, I have never given my password out to anybody. Here's the thing though, even if you're able to correctly guess another player's weak password, that doesn't give you the moral ground to delete his outposts and kick everyone out of his alliance. Well, that's my opinion at least. Some players would say that everything is justified in a war, including all of those half-ethical tactics I talked about earlier. I decided to drop out of the war when I realized that, in many ways, the Kingdom of Nef was engaging in the same type of despicable behavior that some of the Misk players were guilty of as well. I'd like to reiterate something. Some NEF players and some MISC players were doing this, but there are players on both sides who weren't, and I can still respect them. Being a member of an alliance that participated in the server war taught me a lot about how to play the game, as did my tenure making videos while I was a member of NEF Bloody Kings. I was lucky enough to be able to leave the war with my resource villages and my outposts intact, and I've really enjoyed the more relaxed pace. While I was a member of Kingdom of Nef 2, I had to be available to log into my account at all hours of the day to save my troops or my resource villages, and that was absolutely no fun. If you were to ask me why I think the server war has lasted so long, almost 3 years now, I would have to tell you that the players on both sides are far too emotionally invested in the stakes of it. The leaders of the kingdom and the leaders of the MISC are too stubborn to admit wrongdoing, and both alliances feel as if they deserve some of the other alliances' property, such as metropolises and royal towers. Let's wrap up this video then by talking about how the server war has revealed some of the mechanical deficiencies of the game, because that is something it has definitely done. When the war began, the two alliances owned most of the property on the server, and not much has changed to this day. Royal towers have been exchanged in combat, but due to the difficult nature of capturing capitals and metropolises, this war hasn't been able to be won. In order to capture a capital from another player, you would first have to launch and land a successful capture attack. Then you'd have to hold onto the capital for 24 hours, or a slightly reduced time if you used special equipment. That's a nearly impossible task. Instead of making it any easier or providing any more of an incentive for players to go after capitals, the developer has simply made them useless in the game. Capitals enable all of the players in the alliance to recruit troops, which are now available from glory titles, which most powerful players in the game will always have. Also, most of the shady techniques we talked about in this video make use of exploits in the game's mechanics. If there wasn't a stated limit to the number of messages in one's inbox, it would be harder to steal another player's resource villages and get away with it. If protection mode protected resource villages, players could take a break from the game without putting themselves at risk. Anyways, I hope this video was entertaining for you, and if you've been wanting to get a peek into what the server war was like for me and others, I hope it satisfied that itch.